bit simple, not many prayers. But if we, yeah. So the first part is it's the auspicious, especially for the first teaching, we all thinking all together. Well, actually, it's Root Institute on behalf of all the students offering a mandala as a request for the teaching. So we imagine that the Buddha is right here. And of course, if we understand what Buddha is, we know that's true. And we imagine offering all the universe, the objects of the universe, all the marvelous things that make people happy, thinking simply, offering to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. It's very auspicious meaning. And then we'll just sing a little refuge prayer. You're going to put it up for us, Shanti, or is it so I just sing it?
Yeah, I just got it up. One moment.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Anyway, good morning from Santa Fe. It's 6:30 in the morning here. Luckily, I like to get up early. Okay, wonderful. The second prayer down the bottom there. Shanti, will you be the Umze or shall I lead it?
Please lead it, Venerable.
Okay, I will do that. So if we know the mudra, we can do, but the meaning is the point. The whole meaning, don't just sit there being holy, saying some Tibetan words. The meaning is that we're thinking in our mind all the marvelous things of the world, basically. I mean, if we know the Buddhist cosmological view of the universe, we can imagine that. But if not, just think of all the wonderful things and just pile them all up in your mind, sincerely as a request to the Buddha for the teachings. It's so meaningful. And here we've got Buddha right behind me, my nice Thai Buddha. So we imagine. Saji perki jugshing metog chamri rablingji ni de genpadi sange jingdu mikte ulwagi trokon nam dag jingla chapashog. And you imagine Buddha happily receives our offering. Hidam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. Now the other one, somewhere there, no, just the refuge prayer, the start of teachings. No, not in this lot, another lot. Perhaps where it is. Start of the teachings, it's called. No, none of these. So never mind, don't worry, Shanti. I'll just say the prayer, but we think the right thoughts. That's the main thing. Doesn't matter. Take it down, Shanti. It's okay. We don't need it. It's nice just to have the thoughts, I think. Sometimes we can just sing these prayers mindlessly, you know. So the second prayer I'll sing, we'll do this one every morning, every evening before the class. The first two lines are for those of us who already identify with being a Buddhist. So it's just reiterating our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings. Refuge, in other words. And the second two lines are expressing our motivation. That's what the Lamas would say. But probably we in the modern world might say, what's our purpose? What's our goal? Why are we here together? So we're just thinking the most altruistic reason is we're going to listen to these teachings to take some tools from it. It's got to be advice, you know, to take advice from it. To do what? To help us develop our own amazing potential. Do never underestimate that. Why? So that we can be a benefit to others. We all understand, you know, we love the idea in Buddhism about compassion and bodhicitta, but I mean, the first part is the two wings of a bird, okay? A bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. And the wisdom wing is all the work we do on ourselves to help us become a marvelous person. So don't ever underestimate that. We sometimes forget that. We sometimes think, oh, that sounds selfish. On the contrary, then we can be a benefit to others. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, compassion is not enough. You've got to have wisdom. And wisdom is all the work you do on your mind, putting yourself together, you know, which we're going to talk about. So we think the second two lines are, we're going to listen to these teachings so we can become a Buddha, so we can be a benefit to sentient beings. That's the essence of this prayer, thinking like that. Sangye charang soke chognam la, jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi, dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki, drola penshi sangye drupha shog. Sangye charang soke chognam la, jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi, dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki, drola penshi sangye drupha shog. Sangye charang soke chognam la, Jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi, dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki, drola penchir sangye drupha shog. Okay. So I'm hoping you too. Also, I sent those course notes, didn't I, Shanti? I sent that PDF, didn't I? Basically, the course notes I thought would be useful is a course that, in fact, I gave in Land of Medicine Buddha quite a few years ago. And it's just a weekend course. So it's obviously a very brief summary of the whole lamrim. I mean, if we think of amazing Geshe Sopa in Wisconsin, his lamrim, which is published in 5 volumes by Wisdom, he took 25 years to teach it. So, and this is not, and so mine was just 2 days. Not for nothing did I call it a very simple presentation of the lamrim, This is what, so we'll be doing that here, maybe 8 hours or so, just try to get the essence of it. And the point I'm going to be emphasizing, I'm not going to go into depth. I mean, I'm not qualified to do that, like Geshe Sopa, my goodness. But for me, that's what's important about this presenting the path is to try and get a sense of this, the orderly, the kind of incremental stages of this path. We know very well the lamrim means gradual path, but even after all these years, and I still, knowing well the meaning of the word, still it's a foreign kind of concept to us. For example, if you studied music or mathematics, you wouldn't say, oh, I'm studying a gradual path of music. Well, actually you are. It's a really perfect term, but we think of it more, the word we would use is it is a course. And as soon as we say we're doing a course, whether it's a 10-year course or a week's course, we get the concept. It's you begin with the basic stuff, you go to the middle stuff, you get to the advanced stuff, and then you graduate. We really get the idea. But I think it takes us a while, certainly us modern people, we know that with music, math, all of these things, but as soon as it comes to a spiritual path, we think somehow very differently. Well, first we think of a spiritual path as mystical. Certainly we brought up as a Christian, for example. I mean, you believe God has the plan, God runs the show, God is the boss, and I'm not complaining about that. It's a marvelous way to live your life. But there's no view like that in Buddhism. It's quite shocking to hear. It's fundamentally different. There's no person out there running the show, I mean, if you have great faith in God, you need blind faith because God's got a plan. God knows what's going on. Nobody else does. Well, at least somebody does. But there's no view like that in Buddhism. There's no person running the show. Buddha's view is we all run the show, but we don't realize it. And this is the worst suffering. We're going to talk about this. So the point I'm getting at is that, we have this mystical idea of religion. And yes, there are incredibly mystical levels of it. There's no question. But don't mystify the whole thing. When you get to the highest levels of physics, it's very mystical if you're only in grade 1. When you get to the highest level of any body of knowledge, it's mystical if you're only in the beginning. Same here. But all of this, the point of this packaging, and as we know very well, historically, the source of this course we're doing, which is in these course notes you've got, the summary of them, is Tzong Khapa, our lineage Lama, our 14th century patron saint, if you like. He established that, the Gelug tradition has roots itself in Tzong Khapa in the 14th century. And some of his literature, the lamrim literature, some of his most extensive, with these commentaries, and his source was Atisha, obviously other texts, but his source was this simple little text written by this marvelous Indian yogi scholar saint in the 11th or something century, whenever it was, not very good at history. He wrote this little text called Light That Guides You on the Way. He was, in fact, in Tibet. He spent the last 15, 20 years or something in Tibet of his life, because he was invited by the Tibetans from India. He's one of these great scholars from the Nalanda scholars, who spent many years in Sumatra with his guru, Salingpa, when Vajrayana Buddhism was flourishing there. Then he came to Tibet and spent the last years of his life there. Buddhism already been flourishing there several centuries, 3 or 4 centuries already. But he sort of felt, they'd lost the plot a little bit. And because Vajrayana was flourishing, which means all the other Buddhism was flourishing too, the earlier stages. But he wrote this little text that put it all in a nice order. And the point about this text, this is not evident to us. Certainly when I first heard these teachings from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, when I first heard my first teachings in the mid-70s in Australia, and it was a lamrim intensive 1-month lamrim course from Lama Zopa. I mean, I heard all the words he said, but I really didn't know how to get hold of it. I did not comprehend what he was talking about. I really had, and it was based on the lamrim, of course. I had no idea what he's talking about. I couldn't put the concepts together. I kept thinking to myself, where's the Buddhism, I mean, obviously my mistake. I had no concept of what Buddhism was. So basically what it is, this presentation, Okay, the other point is that the problem is when we think of a spiritual path, we don't think of it in the same way of learning music. We don't think of it as gradual. So, for example, I said before, we all love the idea of Buddhism being about compassion, but we would never think if you were asked, well, where does compassion fit? Is it the most advanced level? Is it the beginning level? We would shrug our shoulders. What do you mean level? It's just compassion is compassion. But no, it's not like that. Compassion is the more advanced level. I mean, as we know, this lamrim, this term, Tsongkhapa's, or maybe not even Tsongkhapa's term, but he uses it, this gradual path, gradual implying, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche, politely honoring the lineage, would refer to the first stages of practice as the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. Well, I joke, but I mean it, and I use it in these course notes a lot. You'll see it, that I prefer to call it junior school. I mean, it's just fairly casual, but we get it immediately. Oh, I get it. You know perfectly well you go to junior school first. You can never confuse that. But the lowest scope, still it's an odd phrase, it's not how we talk in modern language, but that's what it's implying. So as soon as we say junior school, for my mind, it's kind of cliched, but it really works. So the first stages are, so the next one, as we know, as Lama Zopa calls it respectfully, the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the middle capability. Well, that's high school. Why not? Now, this other analogy, the two wings of the bird, that's the wisdom wing. Now, if you were studying in Thailand or Burma, you'd be studying these teachings. This is exact, and you'd graduate there. You'd graduate at the middle scope. You'd graduate at high school, because what you'd accomplish would be your own nirvana. The first stages of practice, you'd abide by the laws of karma. We're going to go into all these. The next stage, you're going to go and work on your mind. You get renunciation. Then eventually you'd get concentration, shamatha. And then you'd realize emptiness. And then one life or other, you would have, achieved your own liberation. And the end of that life, you're out of here, baby, and don't come back. That's what you would have done. Now, if you're on the Mahayana path, you've got the compassion wing as well. You continue. You continue to come back, even if you don't need to. And now you add bodhicitta to the mix, and that is the compassion wing, and that is necessarily way more advanced. Which doesn't imply you don't have compassion first. We'll talk about this. Of course you do, but this extra powerful level of the compassion wing, which is driven by this very specific type of compassion, which is called great compassion, mahakaruna, which is this powerful, brave attitude that it is my job to lead all sentient beings to enlightenment. It is my job to take away their suffering. It's a whole other level, whole other dimension of compassion. And the fact is, as the Dalai Lama says, compassion is not enough. You've got to have wisdom. So meaning you just got, and that's university. That's university. That's university, the great scope. Then, of course, you've got postgraduate, which is Vajrayana. So it really fits perfectly calling them like that. And it makes us realize they are in stages. And we know by definition, you cannot possibly leap into university, postgraduate without university. And you can't go to university without high school. And I'm sorry, you're not ready for high school if you haven't done junior school. It's really logical. And that's the approach. And so it's to hear the teachings like this, to hear why is it, for example, the essence of junior school is abiding by the laws of karma. We're going to get into that. So why is that first? We've got to know logically why. Logically, not just, it sounds good, It's a really powerful point. And that I can't, and for me to get to, like I said, this course we're going to do, and the course notes you've got, are just touching on things. And it's very casual. I mean, I'm not a great scholar, but it's just touching on the essence of the points of all these and trying to express how one comes before the other and just logically why, psychologically why, to understand the psychologically why it's like that. How it's not, and the way Buddhism, for example, would describe compassion. The level of compassion that Buddhism is talking about is absolutely impossible without having first understood karma. This is literally true. It's impossible to understand that level of compassion until you've got some renunciation, which is at junior school and high school. And to understand that is the key point. So for me, it really is an overview, getting the taste of these, but mentioning all the bullet points, mentioning each of the points throughout the lamrim and trying to express them in this way to show us how it's gradual. And then once we've understood all of these, the different points of the path, and we just saw them. The Lamas always say, if you just pick up any Dharma book, randomly open a page, and you read one sentence, if you understand the lamrim, you know exactly where that fits in that whole package. And that makes sense. If you're studying music and it's got a whole different levels in the music book, and you open up any page randomly, you will know exactly where you are in relation to that. You say, no, that's grade 7. I'm only in grade 5. You'll know it immediately. You'll know where it fits. And then you'll say, oh, no, I've done that. I'm already past that stage. That's the way we have to think about the teachings. I remember hearing the Lamas say this. And I mean, it took me a long time to understand this. I know even when I first started working for Wisdom Publications, my first job for the Lamas when I became a nun, and editing Pabonka Rinpoche, Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. I mean, I was so overwhelmed by this weird book, I didn't understand it. I edited the thing, began to anyway. I didn't finish it. I left Wisdom after that. But it was just so complex and so unusual. I couldn't get the point. Couldn't understand what he's talking about, seeing it as levels. Couldn't understand it. It's very curious. It takes a while, because that's the point of this lamrim, Tzong Khapa, Atisha first and then Tzong Khapa. It's to get us to see the different stages, And what stages? Inner stages, not outside, inner, internal. It's psychological, Okay, so the first point, I mean, I always quote, first of all, Lama Zopa Rinpoche's approach, because when he first started teaching, and indeed it was mainly Westerners and mainly these hippies. I don't know why, but in the late 60s, hippies went to Asia to find two things, enlightenment and drugs. Don't ask me why we conflated those two things, but it was always the way it was. Enlightenment came along with drugs. And then ridiculous Westerners, ridiculous Western hippies, because they saw Tibetans with the men with their long hair and they wore earrings and everybody had long hair and long clothes. They kind of thought they were like hippies. But I mean, actually, Tibetans are really conservative people. It was like a joke, Anyway, the point is I didn't meet the Lamas. I met them in the mid-70s in Australia, in fact. But Lama Zopa, when he started teaching, obviously, if you're an Asian person or like a Tibetan, karma, the concept of karma and the concept of mind being not physical are completely just part of your culture. It's in your bones since you're born. You just know this. In the same way, if you're brought up as an Australian, Christianity is just embedded in you, or more broadly for all of us these days, the materialist philosophical views are just embedded in our brain. We take it as a given that our mind is the brain. We take it as a given that mummy and daddy created us, these type of things, the materialist view. But for the Tibetans and indeed Indians, the source of all this material, this is was a given. And karma's been around for several thousand years. This was first observed by the genius Indian yogis and scholars well before the Buddha. They were the ones, I always quote this, they were the ones who, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, you amazing Indians were the ones who first began the investigation into the nature of self. Buddha came out of that remarkable tradition and then he diverged in his own direction, So that view is a given about mind. So, of course, there's Lama Zopa starting to teach, Western hippies whose view is that their mind is the brain. So they've got the first point Lama Zopa always would teach is the nature of mind, beginninglessness of mind, and how it's not physical. This is always the biggest shock. That was the part that was so shocking for Western hippies to hear, because it was just, what are you talking about? What about the brain? So even now that's a shock for people. So we've got to understand, because if we're trying to understand enlightenment and this path, you've got to know what gets enlightened. And what gets enlightened is your mind, and that ain't your brain, baby. The expertise of these genius Indian yogis is not the brain. Nothing wrong with neuroscience, but it's not what Buddha's talking about. His expertise is the internal cognitive process itself of our actual consciousness. So it's radically different. So we've got to at least get the theory right from the very first step. What is this thing that gets enlightened, But I always like to start with that, before we even get there, with the word Buddha. Have a look at this. Often the Lamas just mention it, but in passing. But I find this a very powerful point as a starting point, as a reference point. The etymology of the word Buddha is very delicious. And when we hear this, it tells us exactly what the job of a Buddhist is. It's undeniable. So the etymology of that word, Bud, and the Tibetan equivalent, Sangye, the first syllable implies the utter eradication from one's mind of all delusions, all ego, all fears, all nonsense, all attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, these words we are so intimately familiar with. Now, this, even just hearing those words in a simple way, it's comparing with modern psychology, modern neuroscience, that's the nuttiest thing you've ever heard. I beg your pardon? If you go to some therapist, who talks about your brain and your chemicals and your DNA and your genes, and you say, may I have please methods to get rid of all fears, all delusions, all ego forever? She'll think you're mentally ill and give you a pill. And I'm not joking. So this is an outrageous concept, but listen to it. This is the end result of all this path, Buddha. So Buddha, the first thing you will have accomplished, and in a sense, that's the wisdom wing. You will have rid the mind. If you're a Hinayana Arhat, you have rid your mind utterly and forever of all neuroses, all delusion, all ego grasping, all the misconceptions, which we're going to discuss, especially in high school, middle scope. Not only that, if you're on the Mahayana path, Da implies the development to perfection of the rest of the mind. And what's that? Love, intelligence, kindness, compassion. So this is right here, the end result. When you hear that's what the goal is, that tells you your job. That tells you the job. Clearly, if I can rid the mind of all the neuroses and grow to perfection all the goodness, it is fairly evident my job is to distinguish between them. That's the essence, that's the essential job of a Buddhist, from A to Z, I promise. That's the actual job. When we start to do that job, and that job doesn't really start till high school, until the middle scope. But this is very powerful to hear that word, to hear that. That's the end. If that's the end result, this tells us the job. And that grounds us immediately, That's why you got this lovely story. I forget exactly the details. I think it was Atisha. I can't remember. Maybe it was, I can't remember. Some student said, I've just done my circumambulations or something. He said, well, I'm very happy, but I hope you practice Dharma. He said, oh, all right then. So then he said, I've just done my mantras, same answer. I've just done my this and that, same answer. So what's he talking about? Practicing Dharma. The meaning of practicing Dharma is changing your mind, lessening delusions and growing virtue. That's it. And why? Because that'll end up being a Buddha. So it's really simple if you hear that. And it gives some clarity to us, because often one of the commonest responses, certainly of certain people like me coming from the West, I didn't study Christianity that extensively, It was just overwhelming. What am I doing with all this stuff? Where do you begin? What is all this, But if you hear this, that's where you're heading and that's what the job is, then you understand that the purpose of everything else is to help you do that job. That's the bottom line. It's very marvelous to hear this, and that's what Buddha's found. So if that's true, the next step we should talk about before we go any further, who is this person? Who is this Buddha? Where did he get this idea from? And this is something I always quote as well. I love this. One fellow in New Zealand years ago, in fact, he was a scientist, and this is the only time I've ever had this question. It's very fascinating. He said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? That's a brilliant question. And that, of course, is a logical, accurate question if you are talking about a creator. And that's the assumption we have of religion. As soon as we hear spiritual, as soon as we hear, we think it comes from a creator, the source. That's exactly why that question. Well, of course, he was completely shocked, and everybody laughed when I said, would you ask Einstein who revealed the teachings about relativity to him? And of course he wouldn't. Of course he doesn't. And this is the point. And this has to be the starting point. And I'll mention this 1,000 times because we have to remember this, because we love to put religion in the sky. Now, if it is a Christian view and it is positing a creator, then it is appropriate to ask that question, because that's exactly the point. God is the source. There's no question about that. But that's not the view here. It's not from revelation. Indeed, in Buddhist teachings, as you're more advanced, you will have experiences of revelation from the Buddha in your meditation, no question. But the usual view of religion is it's not something ordinary people could have. It has to come from on high. That's not the Buddhist view. Every word, this person Buddha, this person Shakyamuni, the great Shakya, this man, this Indian prince, handsome, gorgeous guy, he went through all his system as far as he could go in the previous marvelous systems, and then he diverged in his own direction, specifically in relation to his own direct experiential findings about the nature of self. So the information, like with Einstein. So how did Einstein come up with relativity? Is this really logical? We get this. We're brilliant at this in our culture. How did a botanist come up with botany? How did anybody come up with any body of knowledge? They didn't make it up, create it, and then plonk it on. A botanist doesn't make up botany and then plonk it on gardens and then copyright it. That's how we think about creator. No, a clever botanist, she would observe a garden. She would observe what's right in front of her. She would observe the workings of the natural world. And then she would articulate those laws. She'd test them and codify them and then present them. That's exactly what Einstein did. So we know if he told us that he'd have a revelation, if he told us he'd had a dream about this, if he told us he made it up, we'd throw him out the door. What a load of rubbish, you know. Even if he said to us, well, I'm not sure if I'm right, but I'm telling you my own feelings, we'd tell him to shut up until he's certain. We don't want to hear his speculation. We want to hear his findings, please. Well, that is exactly, no more and no less, that is exactly Buddha. But this takes a while for us to think about, because we tend to think you've got to believe. One of the commonest words we use is we believe in something. I mean, you wouldn't say you believe in botany. You don't say you believe in relativity. Well, actually, you do. You wouldn't believe it only until you prove it yourself. So this is the point with the Buddha. This is the point, you know. He's a person who was a regular guy who did this hard work and did the job that the end of and accomplished the end result. He rid his own mind of all the rubbish and he developed to perfection all the goodness. Well, it's like anybody who's done that work, anything, whether you've made a cake or discovered relativity, you present the findings and you know you've done it yourself and here are your findings. And then you say, over to you now, you'd like to make this cake, here's the recipe. If you want to become a Buddha, here's the recipe. If you want to discover relativity, here's the recipe. Not just believe in it. This is the most absurd intellectual laziness. To sit back on your laurels and go, oh, I believe in botany, or I believe in mathematics. I'm happy you believe in it, but it's not going to help you. You've got to know it. That's the point. This is crucial to understand. And as His Holiness the Dalai Lama often tells us modern people, if you go along, and this is my words here, using Buddha's methodology, ticking the boxes as you go, and you do at some point find that actual experiential findings that what he says is true isn't, then of course you must reject the Buddha. That's the approach. So that's what practice means. So, okay, now the other point is, then we get confused as soon as we say spiritual practice, you know? We say spiritual practice. What do we mean by spiritual practice? Hang on, I'm going to do something here. Here we go. So, as soon as we say that, we visualize somebody with a candle on and some incense and then sitting with their legs crossed looking very holy. I mean, this is the most cliched idea, you know? So practice isn't just one-dimensional, isn't just when you're sitting on your cushion. That's finally practicing the piano is also the same. That's where you put your money where your mouth is. But you can't just walk to the piano and start intuiting Bach. You can't just walk to your cushion and close your eyes and think something magical will happen, which is a really common, bizarre misconception. There's some secrets in the mind that we have to discover, you know. No, the first step before you practice the piano, you've got to squeeze your brain, as Lama puts it, with all the musical theories. It's pretty obvious. And you won't sit there in theory class going, which is common what happens in Buddhism. People say, oh, I don't want all this theory. I want to practice. You would never say that in your music class to the teacher. I don't want all this boring theory. I just want to play the piano. I mean, you'd be schizophrenic saying that. But that's how we tend to think when it comes to Buddhist practice, you know. It's very bizarre. So what's your first step? Okay, it's to listen to Buddha's own views about the mind, what it is, what happiness is, what suffering is, and the world in general, because that's what the content of Buddhism is. The content of Buddhism is his observation about how everything exists. So maybe that's a surprise to us as well. Buddhism is actually a coherent worldview. It's what scientists all talk about, trying to get a view. I always forget the term now. An answer to everything. I forget what the word is they say. A view of everything or something. Well, Buddhism is actually that. You don't have to believe it, but it is that. It's a coherent view of the entire universe. exactly what it is, where everything comes from, who is this, why that, what is happiness, what is suffering. That is what Buddhism is. So you can learn bits of Buddhism. You can go and learn how to watch your breath. Buddha taught that, which is often what people think only Buddhism is, which is ridiculous. You can learn parts of Buddhism. You can be a 1% Buddhist, no argument. But here we're discussing the whole path, in this particular module anyway. So, and I love the overview. I like it. I like the big picture. So anyway, it's a world view. So if that's the case, then what is it? Often we hear the Lamas say practice has got 3 kind of levels. You've got listening, then you've got thinking about it, and then you have actual when you go to the piano, actually on your cushion, you're meditating on it, as they say. But what's involved in those 3 stages is one thing: is your mind. Your mind is beginning at the grossest level. You listen to the concepts. You listen first. You listen to the musical theory. Then you think it through, the logic of the musical theory, and then you put it on the piano. It's pretty simple. It's the same here. You can't have one without, and of course, if you get stuck and think that you're a great musician because you know every bit of musical theory, and someone says, please play the piano. Oh, no, I can't do that. Well, no, you're a fraud. And it's the same here. This is the biggest danger because we are all very brilliant, very technically and very intelligent in the West, modern people. We're super educated. So we can easily get so caught up, get captivated by all the theories, but not actually put it into practice. Well, it's like learning cake recipes and not making a cake. It's like learning musical theory, but not playing the piano. It's ridiculous. So you've got to not get confused about what practice is. But so the end result of all that theorizing is that you internalize those views, and eventually they become your view of reality. So another way to put all this then, so first of all, if the end result is this word Buddha, free of all the rubbish and full of all the goodness, then obviously you've got to ask the question, well, why should I want to get rid of ego, fears, anger, depression, anxiety, attachment, etc.? And why would I want to develop to perfection love, compassion, etc., etc., etc.? I mean, already I'm implying it by saying all the rubbish and all the goodness. But this is Buddha's key point. This is Buddha's essential point, that, and so one way, based on that word, one way of framing the whole of Buddhism is as a method to stop suffering and get happiness. That's absolutely one way of putting what Buddhism is. But at the same time, we can equally say, and this is the real point, is that it's a method for stopping ignorance and getting wisdom. Because Buddha's view is the extent to which our minds, and this is the point now, are caught up in conceptions about reality at different levels, the extent to which we are caught up in believing in things that aren't true, believing in things that don't exist, is the extent to which we suffer. This is across the board. This is a major point to understand. Now, I find this is very interesting because we talk about getting wisdom in our culture, in the modern world. We admire wise people. We honor magnificent musicians, amazing artists, brilliant scientists. But we all know that does not mean that you've got ethics, and it doesn't mean you're happy. So Buddhism is a system of ethics. It is a system of getting wisdom and quitting ignorance, and it is a system of stopping suffering and getting happiness. They all have to come together. But if you're a genius mathematician, I always joke, but it's true, you can still go home and beat up your husband and children because you're neurotic. We don't find that a contradiction in our culture because as far as we're concerned, wisdom's here and happiness is here, and we see no relationship between them. That's a very interesting point. Well, for Buddha, it is an impossibility to have happiness without wisdom. And it's an impossibility to have wisdom without happiness because they come together. This is very interesting. And this is underpinning, or this is a theme throughout Buddha's teachings. And ethics is another way of putting it, is all totally implied. Whereas you can be a brilliant artist and have no ethics. You can be a brilliant artist and not be happy because we don't integrate all these parts of ourselves. But you'd say this part of the Buddhas, this big picture, is all of these parts of us are integrated. You cannot have one without the other. It's not a possibility. And that's how we're going to express these different stages of the path, Okay, so Then there's the word Buddha. It tells us the job. Buddha is telling us we suffer because we're full of nonsense, full of misconceptions. And our goal is to get happy, which means ridding the mind of the misconceptions. And then also getting wisdom. So all of this. So then, okay, so if it is possible we can become this Buddha, the very starting point, you have to ask the question, well, what part of me becomes the Buddha? My toes, my fingers, my brain? No, not your body, not at all. Your mind, baby. So that means the first start, back to Lama Zopa, we better look at what the mind is right there. This is the very first thing. This is taking Rinpoche as our precedent here. So mind, this word mind is used synonymously with the word consciousness, broadly speaking, in Buddhism. It's the first point. Second point, it is not physical. We're not discussing the brain. Buddha does not argue with there being a brain. That's not his job. That's why it's so marvelous these days, His Holiness and all the Tibetan brains, best brains in the Tibetan world, Tibetan Buddhist world, having all these discussions with the best brains in the modern world, and this is what His Holiness's expertise is, this marvelous way he brings everybody together. He's incredible, incredible. And it's only really now, we can see that it's only now, even after 40, 50 years of His Holiness being around the West, that stuff is really becoming published and all the clever people of the modern world, the materialist world, are now discovering the genius of these Indian thinkers before the Buddha as well. This incredible system of amazing thinkers way back. But we in the modern world go back to the Greeks. We couldn't care less about Indians. We couldn't care less about the Chinese. We're so arrogant, white people basically. Going back to these Greeks, and nothing wrong with Greeks. But that's where all our source. In India, it's this weird country over there with red dots on their foreheads or something, But I mean, there's incredible knowledge in India. And you Indians are so bizarre that you're becoming more Western than Westerners now. You've chucked out your own past stuff, and you're so eager to be the best computer scientists on the planet, and you are. They say one of the most successful immigrant populations in America are the Indians. It's very interesting. Anyway, it's very fascinating. So anyway, whatever, blah, blah. So the mind for the Buddha is not physical, by definition. If we can prove that Buddha's wrong, the whole of Buddhism will crumble into a heap of absurdity. So that we have to take this as a hypothesis. Otherwise, the rest of it won't make any sense. And like any decent scientist, we will take it as a hypothesis, not just stuff it down our throat and believe it. This is ridiculous. So the first point is mind is not physical, consciousness. Second, it's used synonymously. Those two words are synonymous broadly. Second, this is the biggest shock, massive shock. This is a huge shock, both for the materialists and people who believe in a creator. Your mind, your consciousness is not the handiwork of anybody else. This is the biggest shock of all. It is not, you're not made by your mummy and daddy. They're not your creator. And nor are you the handiwork of a creator. There's no concept like that. Buddha's not just saying, Buddha's just not talking about it. Of course he talks about it. He disagrees with that concept. He's not being rude. He's allowed to disagree. He's giving his own experiential findings. We don't need creating, he says, because why? Because your mind, think of it as like, they use one of the terms in India, in Tibetan, mental continuum. It's like your mind is a river of mental moments. Stop thinking about it like the brain. It's a river of mental moments. And this millisecond of your consciousness is the direct result of the previous moment of your consciousness. And that moment of your consciousness is the result of the previous moment of your consciousness. And that moment of your consciousness is a result of a previous moment. And you track that back in an unbroken chain of mental moments, and you will get inexorably back to the first second of conception. And then your question is, well, where was that moment of mind? Where did that moment of mind come from? It can only come from the previous moment of mind. Your egg and your sperm are minding their own business in your mummy and daddy's body. A creator has nothing to do with it. So you track your own mind back to previous moments of itself. It's not a complicated concept, And then, but of course, we all have the question, but where did it begin? We all want a first moment. We all want the first Big Bang. As His Holiness says, Big Bang, no problem. Just not the first Big Bang, that's all. The universe the same. I mean, the fundamental view in the Buddhist view about the universe, we've got matter, and especially in the Vajrayana system, they talk about the 4 elements. Matter is made of the 4 elements, and they too are beginningless. You get back to the first moment of this universe, however many billions of years ago you like, in an unbroken chain of physical matter, back and back and back and back and back. And then what? It has to come from a previous moment of that physical matter at a subtle level of the wind energy, obviously. This is taking this model of the 4 elements. So you can't have a first moment. This is hilarious for our minds. This is one of the literal, it's a non-question. It's a meaningless question to think, where did it all begin? Why do we ask that question? Because deep in our bones, as a result of the root delusion, which we're going to talk about, the root misconception in our mind that the Buddha says is the source of all suffering. As a result of this root misconception about inherent existence, as a result of that, there is this other very powerful misconception that of no cause and effect, of things being not caused, of being set in stone, permanent. That's one of the key arguments Buddha has, where he diverged from the previous prevailing views, about the nature of self and indeed about the nature of everything else. So it's not the right question. What do you mean, when did it begin? And so, okay, one of the answers we've given in the world for the beginning is we've got the concept of God, the creator. I know Christians talk about, how it's possible to have a first cause. So there's a lot of discussion about that. Not for the Buddha. It's a meaningless concept. It's not viable. So then your consciousness, as shocking as it sounds to us, even as I say it now, it feels bizarre, is literally beginningless. You cannot have a first moment. If you posit cause and effect, you cannot have a first cause, just by definition. That philosophical theory itself denies the possibility of a thing that didn't itself have a previous cause. So right there, conclusion, whatever exists now, matter or mind, by definition is beginningless. As mad as it sounds to us. That's the Buddhist view. This is one of the first things Lama Tzong would talk about. Beginninglessness of mind, not physical, not the handiwork of creator, not the handiwork of mummy and daddy. And that's the biggest shock, because all of neuroscience and all of modern psychology and psychiatry is based upon the fundamental given that mummy and we track ourselves back to mummy, daddy, grandpa, grandma, and back to the monkeys. That's the only place we can track them back to, because we only posit something physical. That's logical if there is only the physical. There's no argument with neuroscience, and there's no argument with all the other views. But if we're positing a consciousness that isn't physical, then it's a whole other discussion. And that's being a lot discussed these days in the modern world, which is marvelous, people looking at their assumptions. Okay, so your mind, that's what becomes a Buddha. That's what becomes a Buddha. Of course, it's not even at the time, but we could look into it, but it's not the time yet in terms of the path to look into the logic of that. But I find it very helpful to talk about that now. That's more advanced teaching, but I find it very powerful for us, very encouraging. This is more like we get to high school, talk about mind. So we study the mind there. And certainly we do things more advanced levels, like Lama Yeshe, for example, and I'm sure I wanted to use Lama Yeshe's book called Mahamudra, How to Discover Our True Nature. It came out in English anyway, in Wisdom, last year. And I was so lucky to edit it, so I'm familiar with the book. But it was such a delicious book, and it's so incredibly important for us to really remember the teachings, this kind of teaching about the nature of our mind. That's when Lama Yeshe, when he first started meeting modern people back in the late 60s, early 70s, and this book was taught by him. He taught this in like 1981 or something in Australia. It's so encouraging to have the view that your own consciousness, first, that it's yours, and this is implied by the word Buddha, it's implied that the neuroses in our mind, the fears, the dramas that preoccupy us, that we are overwhelmed by, are not intrinsic to us, are not at the core of our being. Again, that's implied by this word Buddha, but to hear this explicitly and to think about the mind and what it is and how delusions are not intrinsic to it is very, very uplifting and very, very encouraging. And we need that, because we can all see, all those voices in our head loom large. And of course, when the anger arises and the attachment arises and the anxiety arises, the bizarre, most shocking consequence of this is these voices in our head, think of it that way. I call them my roommates. We believe whatever they say. Well, if you have self-hate, not any person on the planet would sit there and think, well, maybe it's not true that I'm a creep. No, even person will tell you you're not a creep. I am a creep. We love to believe these roommates. This is the bizarre, depressing irony of ego. So to even hear the teachings and read them and listen. I said, reading Lama's book, for example, and it's just uplifting you. Then you start to realize when you hear the craziness, you can tell yourself, okay, it's true. There is anger, there is jealousy, there is depression. Robina, you're right, there is. But honey, it is not at the core of your being. This is incredible. It's encouraging. We suffer so badly because we believe we are creeps. We believe the world is hopeless. We believe I am nothing. We believe I'm no good, whatever it might be, because the thoughts arise. We immediately believe them. This is the worst, most painful suffering of all the delusions, you know. Even when it comes to the deepest delusion, which we're going to talk about, of course, when we talk about emptiness, right at the end stages of the 6 perfections of the Bodhisattva on the university level, as Lama Zopa says, you know, well, this is Buddha's teaching across the board, that these delusions in our mind, and we're going to talk about these in high school, generally all the delusions, the misconceptions, bad enough, Rinpoche says, that that things appear to us like that. Bad enough that attachment causes the cake to look more delicious. Bad enough that ego grasping causes things to look intrinsic. Bad enough that anger causes everything to look so ugly. Bad enough that, but he says the worst part is the thing that keeps us stuck in samsara is that we believe it is like that. That's the killer. Why? Because we believed it for countless eons, Buddha says. So this is, so just to hear about the nature of mind right at the beginning, that it can become the Buddha, that's its true nature, it's very encouraging. It's very uplifting. Especially if you've never had that view. You would just think your mind's your brain, you know, because there's no view. You don't have a neuroscientist telling you that your mind is naturally pure. I've never heard such a rubbish in all their life. There's nobody in neuroscience that says you can get rid of all anger or depression or jealousy. We tried that in the 1930s. It was called a lobotomy. Didn't do any good. So there's no view like that, which is why we like to mystify it as religion. But no, this is psychology. This is Buddhist psychology. It's Buddha's expertise. The mind is Buddha's expertise. And it's, again, like only now that it's mind-boggling, the level and breadth and depth of the teachings about the mind, first coming before these Indians, before the Buddha. Unbelievable. They're the ones who created single point of concentration. They're the ones who created shamatha and mapped the mind. They mapped the mind internally. This is mind-boggling. There's no view like that in our culture. We can map the brain, not the mind, not the internal workings. Oh my God. That's Buddha's expertise coming from these geniuses before him. And only now we're really seeing it in the modern world, you know. It's amazing. It's marvelous. So, okay, the mind, beginningless. Now, and if it can become a Buddha, then the very next thing is, this is now put in the path, added by Tsongkhapa in the 14th century. He said that the crucial preliminary practice, the thing to prime you, to really prime your mind to want to enter into the path, because these are the preliminaries. We're not entering into the path yet. We're priming our mind to get to want to enter into this path. And this point is, you know, this point is, hang on a second, I'm so sorry. This point is, we need a teacher. We need a teacher. I'll just touch on this briefly, you know. This is Tsongkhapa's first, and it's extensive. We know there are extensive teachings in the lamrim from Tsongkhapa at the very beginning, the necessity for a teacher. And as we know in any of the lamrim texts, even that short one, the foundation of all good qualities, well, the foundation of all good qualities is the first verse. The teacher, the guru, is the foundation of all good qualities. So that, of course, to hear that, it's too abstract for us. If you hear you need a music teacher, the music teacher is the foundation of all good qualities. You got to really, the music teacher is the main cause of you becoming a musician. We're going to be confused. Well, you think, well, I thought I was, you know. So it's true. But let's look at the meaning. And I can only talk about it in a very down-to-earth way. I cannot talk about it in the way that Pabonka does in all those bullet points in the lamrim. I just can't. I'll recommend you go read those teachings, but I cannot talk about them like that. For me, I find that most important thing is to try and use ordinary examples to prove the logic of this, not just believe it blindly, you know, to prove the logic of the necessity of a teacher. I mean, and when you can hear it in ordinary things, well, it goes without saying you need it for, you know, for becoming a Buddha. I mean, becoming a Buddha is uncharted territory. Who's become a Buddha before? But you need a teacher, and I always use the example of making a cake. You need a teacher to show you how to make a decent cake, not to mention play the piano, not to mention play cricket, not to mention to do anything. In fact, if you think about it, this is logic, not religion. I think since we're born, think about it, there's nothing we've learned that we didn't learn from someone else. You do it yourself. You can copy your mother, but you had to have your mother there to copy. If you lived in isolation, you could never learn anything. You have to have a person there in front of you. You don't have to have mummy say, do this. You can watch her and be clever, but that's what a teacher is. A person who's in front of you, giving you the example. That's the meaning of a teacher. That's what guru, and I don't know, I speak Sanskrit, but I've heard the word guru means something like heavy with qualities. I mean, what a lovely word. We all need a person heavy with qualities. That's a fact. So it's so logical. You need someone who has done it already to show you how to do it, whatever it might be. I mean, why be so arrogant as to reinvent the wheel? What a bizarre, we have that concept. Why reinvent the wheel? Go ask somebody who knows how to do it. This is obviously the quickest way to do something. It's so clear. Right there's the proof. You need a teacher. That's what a teacher is, But also what's interesting when it comes to Buddhism, of course, I mean, Shakyamuni Buddha, he was the teacher. That's how they called him. He was the teacher. So if you think of that, yourself back then in India at that time, and you were walking around India looking for a teacher, and there were plenty of them, all these guys crawling around in there. I mean, India was full of all these people in their yellow robes going around teaching. It was an amazing place, I'm sure. And I guarantee you in a million years, you'd never distinguish Buddha from the rest. He doesn't walk around with a halo or a sign saying, I am a Buddha. No, you had to check out all these different people, didn't you? All their yellow robes all looking the same. You couldn't have told the difference. Well, you got to check up. So that was who he was. The human being in front of you, he was the human manifestation of Buddha. But we go, oh, that was the Buddha, we say. The statue behind me. But that's just a manifestation in human form of Buddha, because the actual word Buddha refers to the mind. The all-knowing, all-compassionate, all-brave, all-pervasive, all-knowing, all compassionate, all-powerful, all-pervasive consciousness. As Lama Zopa says, it's just like the Christian concept of God or the Hindu concept of God. God is everywhere. That's the Dharmakaya. That's the actual Buddha. But the human body it's a manifestation of the Buddha in human form. That's Shakyamuni. Well, he's dead. As Lama Yeshe says, Buddha's dead. So who are you going to rely upon? A human person now, He was just a human manifestation of Buddha mind. Well, we need one of them now. And as Lama Yeshe says, Buddha's dead. So the Four Noble Truths only become real for you when you hear it from the mouth of a person that you have decided is your Buddha. That's your guru. So there's a logic to the guru business. But when we read, all the the Pabonka Rinpoche logic and Tsongkhapa, it just seems, for me, always just seems so fundamentalist. I can't get my head around it. Of course, it's all true. It's all valid. But just for me to bring it on the earth and talk about the most simple way to prove logically, why you need a person called a teacher. Not to mystify it as some special thing, Oh, wow, do I really have to have a teacher? And then the first thing people say is, well, I don't really want to surrender myself to somebody. All these weird ideas we have, Got to see the logic of it first. The fact is, if there's no logic, don't do it. This is really true. Tsongkhapa, in his one of his lamrim texts called Hymns of Experience, sort of like 25, 30 verses. One of the verses says, all the teachings are to be taken as sound advice because there is no contradiction between scripture and practice. What that means is if you open a good cookbook, all the recipes, all the teachings in this book are to be taken as sound advice. The teachings in this book can be put into practice. They're called recipes. And because there is no contradiction between the recipe and the cake, that's logic. Well, same here. So all these teachings about a guru, it's logic. It's got to be logical. Everything has to be logical. That's the point about the Buddha. It's not something, there's nothing in Buddhism that Buddha would say can't be understood. And why not? Because mind Your mind, my mind, each individual mind is the one that does the job of ridding that mind of delusions and developing in that mind the wisdom that sees everything that exists. There's no other being out there who does it and then we have faith in. There's no concept like that. There's no concept like that. We do the work. So everything has to be understood by your mind. When you study Buddhist philosophy, you learn, in the text called Dura, collected topics. You learn all the nuts and bolts of the Buddhist worldview so you can start to learn it as you go along. It's one of the first texts you study in the monasteries. And I first studied with my philosophy teacher, Geshe Tekchok. So anyway, the very first thing you learn are the different terms for that which exists, for object of knowledge, phenomenon, existent, established base. That's at least 5 synonyms. The definition of an existent, the definition of what exists, is that which can be cognized by mind. So it's axiomatic that which is cognized by a valid state of mind is by definition, it's axiomatic, that is what exists. So that what exists is that which can be cognized by mind. So there's nothing outside of that. It shows the centrality of mind. Whose mind? Your mind, not some mysterious mind up there who bosses everything. Not like that. So everything has to be logical. So guru devotion has to be logical. You've got to prove it logically. Why do I need a teacher? Of course, read the way Pabonka puts it. Read the way Tzong Khapa says it. It's marvelous. But put it down to earth, please. Prove it. And the other part about guru, for me, I find the most potent one. As Lama Yeshe puts it so sweetly, we're all dying for love. I mean, it's so sweet. You want to burst into tears. We're all dying for love, he says. We are. Being this limited, unhappy person now, separate from everybody else, full of delusions and low self-esteem, and I'm nobody and I'm nothing and I'm hungry, emotional hunger and the delusions. Of course, we're dying for love. So then if you're going to have a teacher, as Pabonka Rinpoche says, you better choose your guru very carefully because you're going to end up like them. That's my favorite quote in the whole of liberation in the palm of your hand. If you're going to have a guru, you're going to better choose your guru carefully because you're going to end up like them. It's so perfect. And we are human beings. We need to be loved. We need to reach out. And that's the meaning of devotion. So for me, the logic of guru devotion, the logic of having a guru is the necessity for devotion. And what's devotion? Devotion is broadly speaking, devotion is an open heart. Even if we talk ordinary, she's very devoted to her family. Of course, we're talking there about attachment as well as love. But here, if we take devotion to the guru, devotion to your mentor, devotion for your music teacher, it implies you have a relationship, they are knowledgeable and you want their music and they want to give you their music and you have this mutual relationship, then you are devoted. So of course, when you're playing the piano and you do a really good job and you're at home, you got your teacher right on your shoulder and you can't wait to tell them when you see them again. That's great. We need to use that part of ourselves. Right now, we use it for a bunch of peanuts and dump our heart onto some idiot who doesn't deserve it. And then they crush our little heart. Then we get all hurt and closed because we are devoted to idiots, because our devotion's polluted by attachment now for our boyfriends and our dumb friends. Stop being rude because we don't understand attachment. But devotion is an amazing quality once you've established the validity of that teacher. Don't just have devotion for anybody. Check up first, then devote. And what does that mean? It's so logical. Devotion is so logical. When your mind is full of attachment, anger, fears, depression, anxiety, your mind is completely closed. There's nothing can come out. There's not an ounce of heart there. You're locked inside yourself. But when you start to develop your mind and check up on the teacher and make a decision, then request them to be your teacher, and then you practice your devotion in understanding their teachings, you practice opening your heart. You practice having kindness and humility and compassion and generosity. That opens your heart. So then you're wide open. And when your heart is open, you can receive the teachings easily. Right there. Even I always use the example of learning how to make a cake from my mother. I checked on her. I'd done my due diligence. I'd eaten her students' cakes. Her peers said she was valid. I did all the right checking automatically. Then I asked her, and I was like 26, not 6. Please, Mummy, show me how to make a cake. She was blissed out. And I remember the day, the time, because my mind was ready for it. My mind was open. If I was all closed and negative and what does she think she knows, and she was forcing me to make a cake, I wouldn't have listened. But my heart was open. I was ready. I wanted to know how to make a cake. She was valid. I'd done my due diligence. All the conditions were there, and I learned how to make a cake. And I remember the day. It was an apple and walnut cake. I was 25. I remember the day, the kitchen. It was vivid. I received a transmission from my mother, straight from her heart into mine. So even that, don't mystify a transmission. Oh, you receive a transmission from your guru. Well, I received a transmission from my mum for a cake. Same thing. And what made it all work? She had the knowledge. I did the checking. I trusted. I opened my heart. I asked her. She told me. I listened, and it all went in. That's a transmission. And the key one was I was ready for it. My heart was open. It's logic. It's logic. It's logic. But you got to be intelligent about it, not sentimental, not attached. That's all. So check your gurus, because that's why it's the foundation of all good qualities. It's the quickest way to learn. That's why it's just the quickest way to learn. It's not mystical. Not some special thing there. Of course, we're talking something, the qualitative difference here between a cake maker and a Buddha teacher is slightly different, obviously, but the principle, get the principle. It's the same. Of course, we need a teacher. Of course, we need a teacher. So logical. Good Lord. So check carefully, please. That's enough on guru devotion. So the next one, Atisha, in his text, gets us to, what time is it? 6:30, 7:30. Oh, another whole hour yet. Okay. We'll have some questions soon. The next one, I will have some questions now. We'll stop there. I'm not totally stop, but I'll stop for a moment. And I'll ask, based on what I've said already, I'd like you to ask me some questions, if there are any. If there are any.
Okay, I'll start. Anyone wants to ask a question can raise their hand either in the chat, in the participants, or in the live video. So, Venerable, I had a question. I think it's coming up now.
Yes.
What we study in the small scope as beginners is not in the small scope, in the middle scope is renunciation.
That's right.
And then in the great scope, we study bodhicitta. So when we are beginners, what do we emphasize more, renunciation or bodhicitta? Because, sometimes that is a doubt. Do we try to generate a large heart before renunciation?
Whose question is this? Is this yours? Somebody else?
Yeah, this is my personal question. Yeah.
But Shanti, you just said you prefaced that question by stating that the bodhicitta is a more advanced level, didn't you?
Yes, Venerable, but you get an idea of it before. I think if you go too deep into renunciation, you might compromise some of your bodhicitta. I mean, you do progress.
Yeah, of course. But when we understand, Shanti, that these stages, these practices are incremental, when we understand that in order to actually accomplish, this is the point, to actually accomplish bodhicitta, to actually, not just to understand it, not just to try to practice it, but to actually accomplish bodhicitta, necessarily would be impossible if you haven't accomplished renunciation. So the point is here is this is a big difference about, say, if I'm studying music, we know very well I need at some point to have passed grade 1 before I move to grade 2. We kind of know that, don't we? And then I know I've got to then move to grade 3. But we also know that when I get to grade 3 and I go back and play my grade 1 piece, I play it even better, don't I? In other words, it's not as if you leave grade 1 forever and now that piece is done, because it's all integrated. It's all totally integrated, the whole path. So you can pass, you get some level of renunciation. You can recognize you've got some level of renunciation, and then you start to practice some compassion. But then you start to practice compassion. That's going to increase your renunciation. So they all help each other in the end. But if we get obsessively stuck on grade 1 and try to perfect grade 1, you will go mad, because you can't. You've got to do further stages, and that'll enhance your grade 1. So it's very integrated, but you've got to know where you're at. You've got to know where you're at. So if you're getting too obsessed with the renunciation side, of course it would compromise your compassion. But then if you get obsessed with compassion, with not enough renunciation, it won't be valid compassion. You'll go mad. So they're so integrated, but we've got to know where they fit. That's the key point. You get my point or not?
Yes, yes, Venerable. Thank you.
Good, good. Thank you. It's a really good point, actually. So what else?
Anyone else has a question? You can raise your hand in your video.
Otherwise, we just keep going. It's okay. Hang on a second. Oh, we'll keep going then. Hang on a second. Just give me 1 minute. Please forgive me. I have to go away for 1 minute. Please forgive me.
Sure, Venerable.
Okay, so we keep going then. So then now we get to the point where Atisha begins his text. And that's the point where he gets us now to contemplate, roughly as we know, this preciousness of this human rebirth. So what's his point here? We haven't yet actually entered into the path. This is like he's priming our mind. This is his first point. He's priming our mind to get ready to even want to enter into the path. We haven't technically begun the actual stages yet, but this is getting us ready. That's why it's called a preliminary practice. So what this is basically, I'm not going to go through the 18 different points, but essentially, as we know, if we've studied the teachings, is he presents 18 different points, or these 18 bullet points, 8 things that we've got, the leisures, and what do they call them? Leisures and something or other. Things we've got, certain conditions that we've got, and certain bad conditions that we are fortunate not to have. So this is basically what he's saying, is that if we look at how fortunate we are, and basically you do your market research, you look around the world and you compare yourself with everybody else on this planet. And often you see people do that. You check up, you go online, you see, only 1% of people have this, and 3% of people on the whole planet have that, and only 5% have this. So it's in a sense doing exactly that. You're checking up and realizing, I've got a reasonable human rebirth. I've got some kind of sanity. I've got a bed to sleep in. I've got some money in the bank. I've got some food to eat. I've got some, good support, all of which give me the leisure to do the actual job, which is the point, the leisure I've got and the freedom from a bunch of garbage. I'm not born in a war zone. I'm not completely insane. I've got some sanity. I'm not overwhelmed by terrorism. I'm not struggling to work 18 hours a day to get a bowl of rice. So all of these things that we don't ever think about, we look on and we see the world like this, and we go, and the best we go is, oh, aren't I lucky, we'll say. Aren't I lucky, we'll say. No, you're not lucky. When we learn about karma, we realize we caused this. But the key point here is just to do a bare comparison and realize, oh my God, I can't believe how fortunate I am. So the point of all this, so what's the action point? All of these points that Atisha presents and Tsongkhapa presents, he presents his findings, and then there's an action point. So what's the action point from this? The action point is, I sit on my laurels, aren't I lucky? The action point is, I'd better not waste this resource. So basically, I like, thinking what really Atisha is saying is, we've got a bunch of incredible resources. We like, that's a really good word. We understand the meaning of having resources. Money is an incredible resource. Having things is an incredible resource. And we know the logic of the word, a resource, is something you use to do something. It's a very dynamic word. Well, basically, you know what Tisha is telling us, we have this precious resource, and it's called a human life. Now, that's pretty abstract for us. If we, that's why I like to use the analogy of money. It's a dumb example and a silly, but it's quite profound. And this is the point I'm getting at. If we all know money is this oblong pieces of paper, quite small. Some countries have plastic. Like in Australia, it's plastic. Other countries, it's plastic. I know India is paper. And you see these bits of oblong paper, and basically they're different colors, and they have numbers in the corner. We know that. Now, and this is not a joke now, but hear it literally. If you literally did not know the meaning of that piece of paper, all you see is a piece of paper, even if it's got 10,000 written in the corner. And you'll notice it's kind of boring. It's probably crumpled. It's probably dirty. But if you didn't know the meaning, you'd throw it in the bin. This is a disgusting piece of paper. Look how dirty that is. Ooh, yuck. Or that's boring art. I don't like that art on that paper. I don't like the color. I mean, think about my meaning. It's a dumb example, but it's pretty true. And what's the point here? You don't know the meaning of that piece of paper. That piece of paper, we call it money. It is an incredible resource. It represents a certain, if you give it to somebody, you'll get something in return. This is the simplest, the best example. If you didn't know the meaning of it, if you misjudged it, if you misinterpreted it, you simply called it a piece of paper. It's not even worthwhile. It's completely nothing. The art is kind of ugly. It's dirty. It's crumbled. And it's so small, you can't even use it for toilet paper. Please hear my point. But as soon as you learn that crummy piece of paper is valuable, you can get something with it, suddenly you will treasure it. And this is the point, you won't just put it in a frame on the wall, and that's a resource, you will use it. It's a resource. You will get something for it. Well, that's exactly the way to think about this human life. And it's a big surprise to us. Why? Because we walk around with this big, overwhelming sense of poor, fat, ugly me plodding through life. I didn't ask to get born. We don't know why somebody made me. My mother and father decided to make a baby. God decided to make me, whatever. I don't know why I'm on this planet. I didn't ask to get born. What's the purpose of life? I'm miserable. I look in the mirror. I don't like what I see. I plod around. In other words, I'm not joking. We literally have no idea of the value of this very human life right this second. Meaning what you can do with that money. So what can I do with this resource? That's the attitude of what a perfect human rebirth is. But of course it takes time. We don't think this way. It's a weird idea. The best we can do in our life is think, aren't I lucky? But that's arrogant. It's hubris. Aren't I lucky? There's no concept of luck in karma. It's like looking at your garden. Oh, aren't I lucky having flowers? No, you're not lucky. You work damn hard for those flowers. Lucky is just like no logic. So that's arrogant. You sit on your laurels. Oh, aren't I lucky? No, you're not lucky. And so this is the key point that Tisha's getting us to do, is to give us a wake-up call, to not want to waste this precious resource. Not even discussing that we created this resource. That comes with karma. But we can think about it. Who created this resource? That money in your bank, you will never waste 1 rupee of it, because you worked for it. You would never waste that note. Even if you get 999 rupees worth out of 1,000, you're disappointed. We get that concept. It's a great concept. So meaning the piece of paper in itself is intrinsically worth nothing. This piece of flesh is a bag of bones and piss and shit, It's intrinsically nothing, but it's got the human mind in it, and these conditions that we have got, the fruit of our past virtue. Oh my God, what a resource. How tragic to waste it. That's the concept of precious human rebirth. Of course, we've got to think about it. It doesn't occur to us now. We don't think of ourselves as a precious resource. It sounds like a joke. So if you can do something with money, which is the meaning of the word resource, what can you do with this human life? Well, the lamas will tell us. Atisha will tell us. 1, you can enter into junior school, and you can stop creating future suffering. So that when you die, guaranteed, you'll get another decent human body. You can do that much with this resource. Even more, you can go to high school and get even more renunciation, and you can quit the delusions and give up attachment, and you can stop having any kind of rebirth. You can stop even the rebirths in samsara, the gross rebirths. But you can even do more. You can go to the compassion wing, get bodhicitta, and then realize emptiness and become a Buddha and get the hell out of all this mess. You can do all of that with this resource. That's what the Lamas tell us. And of course, it's so grand sounding, but that's the logic of it. It won't come overnight, that realization. We have to think it through. The penny drops slowly, you know. That's the meaning of thinking about this precious human rebirth. The conclusion, the action point is don't waste it. It's tragic. And you know that. I mean, with money, even if we're not mean, even if we're not miserly, we really value this thing called money. Immediate. Everybody on the planet we love money. Even if we're generous with it, we still love it because we can do something. We know because we can do something. And this is the point. Intrinsically, it's a piece of paper. There it is, a piece of paper, ugly, dirty. You would never pick up another piece of paper that's been on the ground, that people, I mean, I remember somebody did some analysis of what's on money. It's the filthiest thing you've ever known. It's got heroin, cocaine, caca, but no one cares because you know it's valuable. So the same with this fat old body of ours, it might be ugly. You mightn't be the nicest looking person on the planet. It is a bag of bones. It is a bag of, it's a walking sewer, but it is intrinsically nothing, this human body. But that's the same with the money, but it's a resource because it's combined with this human mind, and look what you can do with it and the leisure you've got. You don't have to work 18 hours for a bowl of rice, not living in a desert, not living in a war zone. You're not terrorized. You know, these are the things to think about. It's not accidental either. So that's the thing. Don't waste this precious resource. That's the concept. It's pretty tasty. You've got to think it. It takes time to think it. Because we're so caught up in the value of the piece of paper. We're so caught up in, oh, I don't want that piece of paper because it's not pretty art. Oh, it's a dirty piece of paper. That's absurd. Who cares? People will accept dirty money. It doesn't matter. That's the meaning of precious human rebirth. So the next one. Now, that's the preliminary practice. But the two we've mentioned before, the nature of mind and beginningless, and then the guru, they're the two earlier. Lama Zopa always talked about the mind one. Tsongkhapa added the guru one. And now we've got the Atisha one, which is the preciousness of this perfect human rebirth. Now we are ready to enter into the path. Entry-level junior school, grade 1. But Atisha, in his way of presenting, and therefore Tsongkhapa, we're not ready to practice yet. He wants to increase, to give us a wake-up call. We don't start to actually do the practice yet. This is all practice, but we're getting to the point, and that is the culmination of this first level of practice, which is junior school. And that's where we abide by the laws of karma. That's where we begin to practice. But we've got several more things that Atisha wants us to think about, and therefore Tsongkhapa too, to continue to prime our mind, to continue to give us a wake-up call, not to waste this precious life. So the next thing, entry-level junior school grade 1, Atisha mentions, and so therefore Tsongkhapa, is we now think about death. Now why? Well, this is coming from Buddha's extensive teachings on impermanence. There's vast teachings on impermanence in Buddhist literature. This is a major teaching where he's presenting his own experiential findings and arguing, with some of the previous views about permanence and uncaused and this kind of stuff. So his teachings on impermanence are huge. But Atisha's point here, to give us the wake-up call, he doesn't bother talking about subtle impermanence. I mean, actually, subtle impermanence is really very close to understanding emptiness. It's very delicious. Atisha doesn't talk about impermanence of relationships in terms of chairs and couches and lamps and computers. He gets us right between the eyeballs, and his sole reason, his agenda, is to increase our wake-up call, not to waste his precious life, by thinking about how I will die. So, and he presents 3 points, and they're all divided into their own subdivisions. So the essence of it, these points, he wants us to contemplate, to think about these points, to meditate on these points in order to increase our wake-up call. Oh my God, this precious life, I don't want to waste it. Then you realize, well, I could die at any moment. So you increase your wish. I absolutely must not waste it. which leads us to the next point. Well, let's talk about death here, because that's a major one. So, okay. So his reason to talk about impermanence specifically in relation to death is because he wants us to get the wake-up call. That's why, just to increase our wish not to waste his precious life. So what does he tell us? There are 3 points. The first point he wants us to think about is that death is definite. Well, we'll go, well, excuse me, mate, I already know that. Give me something more intelligent, please. No, he says, you don't know it yet. And this is now what this is beginning to point to. We're looking into our mind now and seeing one of the major misconceptions, the major delusions that is driving so much of our suffering, that's deep in the bones of our being. And this is pointing to this delusion, as Lama Zopa puts it, called grasping at permanent me. Now, this word permanent in Buddhism is really important to understand. There's different interpretations of it, okay? So we would say in our world, we talk about something being permanent. All we mean by that is that it's permanent, meaning it won't break, it won't change, you know? It won't break, it'll last forever, or hopefully, you know, permanent. But that's not the meaning here. There are 2 meanings of permanent in Buddhism, or 2 meanings of impermanent. One is the gross level of impermanence is that things will stop, things will change. And by definition, all things that are impermanent are a product of the law of cause and effect. These are absolutely coming together. So everything that's the law of cause and effect, something comes into being and will go out of being. So at a gross level, a lamp is the product of many causes, and at some point it will stop functioning. That's gross impermanence, and death is an example of that. This person, all the different pieces came together, the mind, the body of the egg and the sperm of the mother, and then as you begin, you go through life, you will die at some point. But the other more subtle level of impermanence is from the very first second of conception. It's the constant process of change. Every millisecond. The subtle meaning of impermanence is that the very coming into being of something implies its disintegration. It's much more subtle. So the one that Atisha wants us to get about is the gross level, death. But permanent, though, in another level in Buddhist philosophy, there are phenomena that are permanent, but not in the sense of lasting forever, but in the sense of not being the product of causes. It's an abstract idea, and that comes later, but not even to mention that here. So mind, for example, because Buddha says it's beginningless, and indeed in the Mahayana teachings it is said to be endless, we would say, oh, that means the mind is permanent. That's not the way they say it. The mind is impermanent. It lasts forever, but in its nature, it changes from moment to moment. It's this highly dynamic product of cause and effect, changing from moment to moment. That's the meaning of impermanent, changing from moment to moment, changing from moment to moment. So something could last for 5 seconds. You could you could have a flower, pull it out of the ground, and 5 minutes later it dies. Or you could have a mind that's beginningless and endless. They're both impermanent phenomena. Impermanent meaning changing moment by moment. So this is a subtle meaning, because when we think of ourselves at a gross level, we know intellectually we are changing moment by moment. We know that scientifically, but because we have this intense grasping at this permanent me, because we can't stand the thought of not being me, then we try to squeeze ourselves into this. So we don't like to look old, don't like our wrinkles, want to keep making ourselves look younger. And that's why we can't stand to think about death, you know. We do not want the thought of death. It's too agonizing for us. And as Lama Zopa says, you know, death was the main cause of fear of death is attachment. So we can see how attachment and thinking things are lasting forever come very strongly together. You can see that with your relationships, with anything that's beautiful. You've got a beautiful new thing. You're in a beautiful relationship. I always quote Nicole Kidman when she was with Tom Cruise. I always mention this. I love the woman. I'm trying to insult her. The Australian actor. She said when she was together with him, we will be together until we are 80. That's how we feel when something is going nicely. You feel it will last forever. You feel about yourself every second. We know technically we're going to die, but death for us is a long, long, long way away, well and truly into the future. We can't even see it yet because we can't stand the thought of it. So just like that relationship, and why does she think that? We all think this because at that time it was delicious, because attachment was getting what it wanted. Attachment only wants things to be nice. So when the relationship is lovely, the house is lovely, your body is healthy, things are going beautifully, the job is good, we kind of think finally now things are going nicely, and we are dumping onto it this feeling that it's going to last forever. That's why we're so shattered when things change, because we can't bear, because we're attached to things. And if you're attached to something, you can't bear to think you won't have it. You can't bear to think it won't exist. So we're lying to ourselves. So we lie to ourselves. So this grasping at things as permanent is very linked to being attached to things, Like, when if you're driving home from work, these days, of course, you're home all the time or whatever, and you're moving towards your house, everything in your being believes with 1,000,000,000% certainty that your house will be there, that your husband will be in the house. We all believe that. That's how grasping at permanence. Because you were in your house this morning, you assume it'll be there tonight. Because your husband was there this morning, you assume he'll be there tonight, and indeed in 80 years' time. We lie to ourselves repeatedly. But then we think, well, what's the point of thinking if it's impermanent? If I think my husband could leave me at any time, why bother? Then we sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater. Or if we think I could die at any moment, we think, well, why bother trying? Because we're too nihilistic, It's much more subtle than that. So the thing is, Atisha's first point is, we need to think about the logic, based upon the logic of impermanence, that I will die. That's a scientific fact. We all know it scientifically. So we've got to try and get familiar with that point. So how do you do that? Well, you can do it in your meditation, but you've got to start with your daily life. So we see death all around us, especially now with all our media bombarded daily with events all over the planet, Death is evident. The rats, the cockroaches, the ants, next door neighbors, around the corner, a car accident, the dog, all the time we're seeing death. But it doesn't touch us, does it? Because, well, first of all, because it's strangers. It's strangers. You don't like them. You're glad the rat is dead. You're glad your neighbor's dead. Now they'll stop shouting at you, almost. So it doesn't really touch us. So we've got to start to look at death differently. Start to see, whenever you see about death, the little wake-up call here is that the action point from this first of the 3 points about impermanence and death is that death is definite. But that's fine. You don't just say, oh, look at that, death is definite. You know what you do? To make it immediately experiential, you go, aha, that'll be me. Right there, it's a wake-up call. Right there. Because right now we've got this hubris. As Lama Zopa says, the world for us is divided into dying people and living people. And we're in the living category, baby. And so there's this kind of arrogance, this hubris. Phew, what a relief. I'm a living person. They're dying people over there. The people on death row, the sick people in the hospitals, the old people, they're called dying people. And we have this a relief that I'm not one of them. As Lama Zopa says, what a joke that is. What a complete joke. It's absurd. We are literally, this is the Buddha's point, we are literally all dying, meaning we're impermanent. But we can't stand to think it. So we've got to start getting used to it. I am a dying person. Think it. I mean, it's shocking and it sounds absurd, but it's just simply logical. So what do you do with it? This is the point. We're not finished yet. We've got to recognize that'll be me. I will die. That is definite. So already you're starting to think, okay, then what's the next point? Well, the next one should scare the life out of us. Not only is death definite, the time of death is not definite. This really is where we start to get the wake-up call. And this is so hard to believe. I mean, we all know it's true. We all know it's true. But even now, as I say these words, and I've been hearing these words and trying to contemplate them for a long time, I still absolutely believe that I will not die today. Lama Zopa says it's best to think you'll die today. But I believe with absolute certainty I will not die today. Of course, I don't know it's true, but that's the joke. Of course, we don't know it's true. If you're clairvoyant, if you're not clairvoyant, you do not know. There's no certainty you won't die today. So why not think, as Lama Zopa says, best to think I will die today. We haven't got to the wake-up call yet. Well, sorry, we haven't got to the action yet. We're getting there, the third point. But this is suddenly powerful. In other words, this marvelous resource we've got. Forget about even that you will die. Have a look at your resources. We all know they change overnight. You get cancer, your money gets lost, you just get sacked, your house burns down, you didn't have insurance, you didn't expect any of that. That happens. Get used to it. Well, the death will come. That will happen. So as Lama Zopa says, best to think I will die today. And I always tell this story. I've told it just recently in other teachings, and if you've heard it many times, but it's a great story. In the lamrim, they talk about this Tibetan astrologer, an astrologer who'd done his own chart. And on his chart, his own calculations showed that he would die today. Well, the first thing he said to himself was, where did I make a mistake? He didn't believe that he would die today. And the story goes, I don't know exactly, he's sitting by the windowsill where there's a wooden shutter, and he's poking his pokey thing into his ear while he thinks about where he made his wrong calculations. And the shutter knocked his elbow and pushed his thing into his ear, and he died. I love that story. It's hilarious. But the first thing was, why? Because he had an instinctive belief that he was permanent. He had an instinctive belief that he wasn't impermanent. He had an instinctive belief that, of course, I'm not going to die. This is really profound. This is not like emptiness. It's easy to understand it, but still experientially, it's very primordial, you know. We can see this. And it's because we're attached, grasping frantically at this me. So here, what's the wake-up call? The third point is now the action point. So the third point is, at the time that I will die, which is when this consciousness departs from this body, at the time that I will die, and I don't know when it is, and it could be today, this is the point. This is a practical issue. Don't think of it as religion. This is practical, of course, based on the Buddha's views. What's important at that moment? Meaning, in other words, what is useful to me at the time of death? It's a very logical question. What is useful to me? Now, if you're a materialist and you have the view that you will just turn into dust, then obviously nothing is important to you. Because we all know you can't bring anything with you, and you don't even bring a consciousness with you. So as far as you're concerned, at least you leave something behind. So at least from the secular point of view, you can be a good person, leave some money behind, be kind to your wife, be kind to your children, and, you know, and die a happy mind. Good enough if you're a materialist. But there's nothing that's any use to you. You can't bring your money with you. Your body's no use. And you don't even have a mind to bring with you. So there's nothing much that's useful for you. But if you've got the Buddhist view, you know that your consciousness is the only thing that will continue. The body will turn into dust. It's certainly, and this is the point, and this is not meant to be moralistic. This is practical. This is scientific truth, okay? That we know, and this is, you know, that things that what do we spend our lives thinking about? Even if we're good people, even if we're good Buddhist practitioners, most of our life, because we're not yogis like Geshe Lama Kontrog, who's given up sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and clothes, and sleep, and food, and lives naked in the mountains 24 hours a day becoming Vajrayogini, as 99.9% of us aren't that capable, then we need to have houses and warmth on the hot, cool days, and hot on the cool, and cool on the hot days. We need food, we need clothing. Even if we live a minimum life, even if we live a humble life and have nothing extra, we still spend hours, do we not? This is not trying to be, it's not sarcastic, it's not being mean, it's literally logical. We know what we spend most of our time on, the resources of our life, making the house nice, and the clothing nice, and the body nice, and the lovely things. We spend all our time sustaining them. Okay, we have them. But we know technically, logically, scientifically. At the time your mind leaves the body, then you leave the body and you leave the husband and the children and the lovely house and the nice new sofa and the money in the bank and the pension plan. This is not sarcastic. We know these words. And as I'm saying them, I'm talking to myself here, you know. So we, as most of us won't be able, we're not capable at this moment to follow in Geshe Lama Kontrog's footsteps and be like a yogi, then we have to be practical. It's true. But at least if we get the sense, the recognition that it is that I am impermanent and I could die at any moment. And so therefore concluding those things aren't of any use to me. What is useful to me is only the virtuous karmic imprints in my mind. And how do I put virtuous karmic imprints into my mind? We're going to talk about that at the end of junior school. That's when I do practical virtuous things. I do my prayers, I do my practices. I refrain from killing, refrain from lying, refrain from stealing, be kind to my husband, don't shout at the kids, don't be mean to the drivers on the road. Every time I do a positive thought and every time I refrain from a negative thought, that's it. That's all I can bring with me, those imprints from my virtuous actions. So obviously, at the time of death, if that's valuable, I better spend some time doing that, which is the logic. It's just logic, but it takes time to think it because we hear it as moralistic. We hear it as heavy. We get guilty. We don't want to think about it. We get, I've got to renounce everything, give up everything. No, be reasonable, be who you are, but just recognize it. That's the action point. So we're not ready to practice it yet, but this is the point to get us to urgently not to waste this precious life. But now our teacher is not happy with us. We've still got more to do to even want to begin to practice. We're not even getting to practice yet. The next point is to increase our wake-up call. He's getting us to get even a more urgent sense of not wanting to waste this precious life. Because the next thing we have to contemplate, and we're not going to do this yet, because I want to talk about the death process and things like that. So this next point is, well, given that I've got this precious human rebirth, given that it's impermanent and I could die at any moment, then when I do die, what are the options of the type of rebirth I will get? So that's where we won't do it today. We'll do it next week. We'll just touch on that briefly. Then what are the options? So this is where we now look at the entire Buddhist worldview of all the different realms of existence, which of course, again, is a brand new idea for modern materialists, which is a big shock to us. If you're brought up in Tibet or India, this is a given. It's part of your culture to understand there are other realms of existence, or at least certainly back in Buddha's day. But this is where it's a big shock for us. So this next point is Atisha and therefore Tsongkhapa telling us, well, you know what, folks? There are lots of possibilities of rebirths, and the vast majority won't be happy ones, aren't happy ones. They're called the lower realms. So this just briefly, no, I think we'll go to that next week. That's the next one. But let's look more at the death one then. So these are the three essential points. I just touched upon them. There's far more to it than this. And these are the things we need to think about to give ourselves the wake-up call that I will die, don't know when, and at the time of death, what's important. So it's narrowing our focus, So then there's many ways to think about that. And this has to be every day because there's so deep in our bones, this misconception of being unchanging, of being somehow permanent, of not dying. So, one example I like to think about, it's very, we get a very strong sense of the movement of time, don't we? Or even when you go out, like, when I'm here living in Santa Fe and I haven't got a car, so people drive me to the supermarket, I go out and I do my shopping. So I already roughly know where Whole Foods is or roughly know where the other markets are, whatever. So I already know it's like a 10-minute drive. So already I've got a strong sense when I leave the house, and this is how we all are with our journeys. You get into the car, and the moment you start driving away, what you're doing is you're moving away from the house towards the supermarket. And it's 10 minutes and you're passing this signpost and you're getting us, and there's a feeling, a real vivid feeling of moving forward, isn't there? Of the goal getting closer. We live our lives like that. When I was doing some job in Albuquerque, actually we did an audio book of Lama Yeshe's Mahamudra book, and I read the book. So it was an hour's drive. I do it every week for a few weeks. That was a vivid feeling of moving towards Albuquerque, moving away from Santa Fe. We get this. Now look at our life, though. That's how we should lead our life, moving away from birth. And every time you wake up, you're another day closer to death. Now, that's not fearful. That's not meant to be a fearful tactic. It's a literal scientific truth. But the fact is, you don't even know where Albuquerque is. It could come in a minute, or it could take 14 hours. That's the point about death. So, of course, if you didn't know how long the journey would take, you'd have a vivid sense of every morning you wake up, you go, God, I can't believe it. The good analogy is your petrol tank hasn't run out yet. If you've got a gas in the tank, petrol in the tank, and you've got a meter, it tells you how much is left. But we don't know that about our death. Nobody knows when they're going to die unless they're clairvoyant. And even if you have your chart, like the astrologer that told him he'd die today, he still didn't believe it. So if you haven't got the petrol meter and you don't know how much gas is in the tank, every morning you wake up, you should be like a miracle. I can't believe it. I'm still alive. This is amazing. This is a really powerful practice, to wake up every morning and one of your first thoughts, I can't believe it. My petrol tank of morality hasn't run out yet. And we're going to talk about that when we get to karma. It's like a miracle, you know, and you're moving towards this place. But we have no feeling of that. We feel like the same permanent me wakes up this morning as the same permanent me who woke up yesterday. And it's like death it's like Albuquerque keeps moving forward because we can't stand the thought of getting to death. So we just pretend it's not there. We can see this. We lie to ourselves. We are literally living in a fantasy land. And all the reason here for the Atisha to think about impermanence is so that we get the wake-up call to not waste the life. That's his point. That's his only point, not to waste the life. Because we're slowly getting to the point where we will start putting our money where our mouth is and we'll start practicing, which is where we begin to abide by the laws of karma. That's the beginning of actual practice. This is just priming our minds to get to that point. So we've got 15 minutes left. So how about some questions before we go? Maybe I've got time to go through the death process next week as well. We could do that roughly. That's from the Vajrayana teachings, but it's very, very helpful to understand it. We might do that. But are there any questions for our last 15 minutes?
Thank you, Venerable. Nivedita Mohanty has a question. Could you unmute yourself?
Hello, my dear. Hello. Happy to see you. Ask me your question, sweetheart.
Yes, this is my first time to hear something about Buddhism. A little bit closer
to the mic. It's a bit, your voice is a bit, get a bit closer to the mic.
Can you hear me?
Bit better, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is my first time to hear something about Buddhism. So I had this question in my mind that like any other religion, why do we have to pray or worship Buddha? Because in the book that you have sent me, I went through it and I felt like anyone can be Buddha. In the first page, it was written anyone can be Buddha.
That's right.
Anyone, I can be Buddha.
Yes. Pardon?
So then why do I need to worship Buddha then?
What do you mean by worship Buddha? Why don't you explain to me what you mean by that?
I mean, the religious practice that we do, like,
no, I know, but I know what you mean, but I want you to say it in simple language. Break it down into simple language. What do you think worshipping Buddha means? What do you understand you're doing? And what does worshipping Buddha mean? What do you understand?
I have no idea. In my mind, I just wanted to take Buddha as my...
No, I'm asking you, you have to break down what you mean. What you mean. You're saying the word worship. I want to know what you mean by the word worship. Then we can discuss your question, because every word has a meaning. So what do you mean by worship Buddha?
The question in my mind was worshipping in the sense, the religious activity that we do. Why do we do it?
I do know exactly what you're saying, but you keep repeating the answer. I want you to think more and put it in simple terms. If a person has never heard the word worship Buddha and they asked you to explain it to them, could you please explain it to me? What do you mean by worship Buddha?
I have no idea. That's why
Then why are you asking? if you don't know what it means?
The activity that I see, I'm just
What is
asking on
good,
behalf
now we're
of.
getting somewhere. What is the activity you see? What is this activity you're talking about? I'm not trying to be sarcastic with you. I'm trying to get you to think, and that's what we have to do. I'm not going to just give you a simple answer. We have to break down these concepts and look at the meaning of them. That's what I'm trying to do in this discussion with you. So what are these things that you're saying that you see that look to you like what you call worship Buddha? What are these activities? Give an example.
Example, like in Hinduism, also we
I'm
do
not asking
worship.
Hindu, I'm asking Buddhism.
Yeah, because
What-
I have been to a temple, a
Good,
Buddhist
a Buddhist
temple,
one.
and
And what do they do there? What do they do, sweetheart?
they burn incense stick, they pray,
Stop. You said one example. Good, now we're getting somewhere. So they burn incense. What are they doing with that incense? What's the purpose of that incense? What is it? What are they doing? Do you know?
No, I have no idea.
Don't
That's
know.
why I'm asking.
What do you think incense would be? What is incense?
No idea.
No idea. Okay, no idea. Okay, who is Buddha? What is Buddha? I'm asking you, what is Buddha?
I'm just trying to know that. That's why I'm here. I have no idea. There's something. This is my first time to learn about Buddha.
No, sweetheart, I do understand that, but you're asking the questions, and that means you have an assumption in your mind, and I'm trying to listen. I'm trying to unpack those assumptions. I know perfectly well your answer. I could quickly give you an answer really easily, but I want to hear your thinking, because we all have these thoughts, and you've got a series of assumptions in your mind, and you don't know why. You just said the words. I know we can all become Buddha, so why do I have to have, what do you say, worship Buddha? So you have a meaning of what you mean by worship. You have a definition, but you haven't said it yet. You said the words, why do I have to worship Buddha? What does worship Buddha mean? You use the words, darling. What do you mean by that? What does it mean for a Hindu? What does worship mean?
I have no idea, and I don't believe in all this.
Sweetheart, you have to know because you asked the question. So what's you asked the question?
Some kind of activity that people do, and I don't know why do they do it, and I just want to know why do they do it.
So then your question is different. Your question has to be, if you don't know what worshipping Buddha means, and I've asked you many ways, you don't know what it means. So surely your question is, why should I worship Buddha? Would you explain to me, Robina, what does it mean to worship Buddha? Is that not your question?
Yes.
Thank you very much. We're getting somewhere now. So you asked the wrong question. Your question.
You were right.
What does worshiping Buddha mean? That's your question.
Right.
Thank you very much. Now we're getting somewhere. Okay. Buddha is okay. Have you ever learned anything from somebody else?
I have just seen my parents doing that. I haven't learned
anything. Learned anything in your life from somebody else? Anything?
Yes.
What is your expertise?
Like whatever I am right now, I have learned everything from some others.
Right. So have you got any one particular teacher that you admire who's taught you something special in your life?
Yes, I learned dancing from a dance teacher.
Good. Now we're getting somewhere. So you've got a dancing teacher. You admire that teacher. You admire that teacher?
Yes, I do.
And you still have that teacher in your life?
Yes.
Oh, she's finished, this teacher, or he has finished. And you're still learning dancing from them.
Right.
So you admire that teacher.
Right.
And you want to be like that teacher.
Right.
So when you go to that teacher, you get classes from this teacher?
Right. Yes.
And you pay a fee to this teacher?
Yes.
And you thank the teacher?
Yes.
And you ask the teacher advice?
Yes, I do.
Well, that's the same as your relationship with the Buddha. No different. Same. Absolutely the same. Buddha is a person you want to become like. So it happens to be formalized as called religion. I know your question, and you use the word worship. You use that word. I never use that word. So you've got Buddha there. I, as a Buddhist, want to be like Buddha. You, as a dancer, want to be like your dance teacher. You revere your dance teacher. You look up to your dance teacher. You request advice from your dance teacher. You thank your dance teacher. Well, that's what I do with the Buddha. That's the meaning of worshiping Buddha, baby. No more and no less. And I beg your pardon?
What about the activities, the other activities that we
Like
do in terms of worshipping?
Like what? Give an example.
Like the incense, like what is the meaning of burning
You're
incense stick?
offering to
Or
the senses. Incense is a beautiful smell, and you're offering to Buddha. You're making an offering to the Buddha. Like you might pay your fee to your dance teacher. You're offering money to your dance teacher. You're offering to your teacher. So you're offering this to the Buddha. And the beneficiary of offering is me. Buddha doesn't need my incense. You know,
right.
it's me creating because we're going to talk about karma soon. Everything I think and do and say produces the person I become. So I want to be like Buddha. So I request with my hands like this in my own mind. The prayers in Buddhism are, may I become like this, may that. So you're making aspirations, you're making prayers for yourself to become like that. When you say to your teacher, please show me this, that's what a prayer is. I'm trying to purposely use an ordinary example because you, like all of us, sweetheart, have many really concrete conceptions about worship. And you already have those conceptions in your mind, even though you couldn't say what you meant by it. So it's just you're developing it. You want to become like Buddha. So I have to have an open heart. I need to be devoted to Buddha. I want to become like Buddha. So I make offerings to the Buddha. I think about the Buddha every day and I do my practices so I can become Buddha exactly like you do with your teacher. So that's why I'm trying to purposely break down the meaning of these words and not just have these concrete definitions of them.
So this will vary from person to person, right? Like the way I worship, it will be different from the way you worship, probably.
But I don't use that word worship. You're using it. You keep saying this word, even though you can't give me a definition. You keep repeating it all the time, but you can't give me a definition. So I'm not going to use it.
I do not have a definition. I'm just trying to get a definition.
No, sweetheart, but you use the word. You use it. So if you use the word, you have to know what you mean by it. Otherwise, you have to use another word. That's what I'm trying to get you to see. You're using the word.
Is there a fixed way of, offering your prayer or whatever? Is there any fixed way?
But why ask that question? You'll find out yourself.
So
is there any fixed way you have to pay your bill to your teacher? Is there any fixed way you learn to ask your teacher for advice? You'll find that out according to your teacher. So go one step at a time. Try not to have too many concrete views. Try and understand what it means you want to become like a Buddha and stop all these religious misconceptions we have. This is my whole point the whole time. That's why I refuse to answer your question simply. I know what you mean, but I'm not going to answer it simply. I'm forcing you to think about it. Are we communicating a little bit now?
Right.
Are we? A little bit?
Yes.
Communicating a little bit. So keep your mind open, okay? And ask questions, but ask the right questions. Not, why should I? You had a kind of resentful, why should I? Instead of what is? That's actually your question. So I'm good. I hope we got somewhere.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sweetheart.
Hello, Amit, can you go next? Unmute yourself.
Yes, Amit. Hello there.
Hello, Venerable. Yes. I loved your analogy of money, the value of money. It's a piece of paper. If you don't know what value it contains, it's fantastic. I mean, how people can have metaphorical lessons from it. I'm a money advisor, by the way.
Oh, well, how interesting. How good. Well done.
The whole principle and my whole value system is to help clients live a better life using the money as a resource by achieving their life goals. Don't get too obsessed with the money. Yes, don't feel too deprived of money. Just create your life goals, use the money and and become a more fulfilled person. That's what I feel is my dharma.
Totally perfect. Wonderful.
Any perspective on that you would like to share? And I know we have many more classes to attend and a lot will come out of it because I'm going to map your teachings on my professional and personal.
Oh, good. Wonderful. I'm so happy, Amit. I think that's enough. You already said it. That's really perfect, But I mean, the thing is maybe what you can even get the people to see, to use your money, as you said, to turn yourself into a precious resource so you can be of use to the world. The money is just a means to an end to help you become a resource. That's in the sense what you're telling your clients, which I think is perfect. It's marvelous. I like it.
I'm looking forward to all the sessions.
Good, Amit. I'm so happy. Thank you so much.
I'll see you again next Friday.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Catherine, can you unmute?
Hello, Venerable.
Who's talking to me? Hello, Catherine. Hello there. Talk to me.
I was wondering if you could... Oh, I just lost the view. Just a second. I was wondering if you could explain about the relationship between consciousness and memory? Because I find it hard to grasp.
In what piece exactly? How do you mean? Which part do you find hard to grasp? So I'd say it a little bit more.
When I have to think a bit. English is not my first language. I'm zooming in from Denmark. So in relation to when I'm thinking about death and rebirth and impermanence, for instance, I have no memory of ever
I see what you
being in
now
existence.
I'm understanding. Now I see your question.
But the consciousness has been here before.
Oh, yes, now I see your question about memory. This is very clear. Thank you, Katrin. I understand your question. Okay, well, from the Buddhist point of view, we've got different levels of consciousness, different levels of capacity of cognition. So we live at a very gross level, which is conceptuality, and then our sensory consciousness. And as we know, in one day, even, like for me, it's 2 hours, no, even whatever, in one day, Katrin, if you had to account for every single thing you thought and did and said in just one day, we'd all be miserable failures. We'd probably remember a few events and we'd probably even remember them wrongly. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So it's clear we have very limited memory. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. Funnily enough,
yeah. And we think that's normal. That's just how we are, because the Buddha's view is we're living at a very gross level of our capacity for cognition, which is our consciousness. And we happen to have much subtler levels of cognition. And we only achieve that properly when we've achieved this practice called single-pointed concentration, this shamatha, this meditation technique invented by these amazing Indians well before the Buddha. It's been around for thousands of years. So when we've accomplished that single-pointed concentration, and we'll go into this, really accomplished that, we've completely subdued the grosser level of our conceptuality, all our thoughts and feelings, and we've completely subdued the sensory consciousness, and we've accessed this subtler level of our mind, which is a bit like the microscope of your mind. And that level of mind, and the only time we ever accomplish that level of mind is in our dreams. Now, some people have very unusual dreams. They can see the past. They sometimes can see the future. It's kind of weird experience, but that's what they call subtle consciousness. And at that level of mind, we've really accomplished it. That's when we can see the past and the future in the most perfect way. And as we progress spiritually, we develop that ever more powerfully, ever more powerfully. We can see further and further into the past. We can see more and more into the future, and we can see the minds of others, because we've got these levels of mind that are capable of seeing things that the grosser level can't. That's the simple answer.
Thank you.
It's a technical point. We've all got the capacity for that subtler level of mind. And the Buddhist teachings are, in order to really be of benefit to other beings, we need to develop that. And that's called clairvoyance. In the world, we talk about clairvoyance as some kind of hippie, trippy, weird thing. And many people have some capacity, but they don't know why they've got it. They don't know how to develop it. But this is something very natural in this view of the mind in the Indian traditions. Do you understand, darling?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Thank you so much. Thanks, Katrin. I think it's time to go home already, a couple of hours. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for your questions. Nibadita, is that you? Nibadita, is that the name?
Nibedita.
Nibadita, is that how I say it? Sweetheart?
Yeah.
Nod to me if I'm right. She's not hearing me.
Yes.
Is that how I say your name? Thank you for your questions, darling. Thank you for your questions, everybody. Amit and Katrin. So I'll see you all.
Thank you, Venerable.
I'll see you all next week, all being well, if we don't die.
And it's Losar.
That's right, true. Now we'll carry on next week and we'll talk about the death process itself, which is really actually very fascinating, which is more from the Vajrayana teachings, but it's very relevant. And then we'll carry on with our... How many teachings do we have? 4, isn't it?
4 teachings. Next Friday is Losar Venerable, which is anniversary of Lama Yeshe.
That's right. So I'll make sure I talk about Lama.
It's only 4 weeks, not 5. I made a mistake.
Oh, 4 is it? I better rush then. Okay, darlings. Jangchub semchog rinpoche ma ke panam ke gyuchig ke panyam pa me payan gong ne gong du pelba shog gewa din yudu dag lama sange drugyo ne drowa chikyang malupa deyi sala Gapasho. Thank you, everybody, so much, darling.
Thank you.